Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at The 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak. It was published in 2010. It's a novel, but it kind of has these elements of historical fiction, romance, and Sufism. And so I was really drawn to this book because of the intriguing premise. You know, a modern-day story interwoven with the tale of Rumi and Shams of Tabriz, who are these like two iconic figures in Sufism.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating approach. I mean, just by connecting these seemingly disparate narratives, I think Shafak really allows us to kind of explore these timeless themes, love, spirituality, self-discovery, but through all these different lenses. And it makes for a really multi-layered and resonant reading experience.
Yeah, and speaking of like the different narratives, can you give us kind of a spoiler-free synopsis of the book?
Yeah. So imagine you're introduced to Ella Rubinstein. She's a 40-year-old American housewife, and she's feeling kind of unfulfilled in her seemingly perfect life. And she's assigned to review a novel called Sweet Blasphemy, which is about the 13th century poet Rumi and this enigmatic dervish Shams of Tabriz.
Okay, so we've got a story within a story. That's always fun. What's the tone like in each narrative?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Ella's story is very introspective. It's relatable. I think it captures that feeling of longing for something more, that's something deeper that many of us can really relate to. On the other hand, the Rumi and Sharm's story, that one's really steeped in Sufi mysticism and philosophy. And so it's told with more of a sense of wonder and enchantment that kind of transports the reader to a completely different time and place.
So it sounds like Shafak really weaves these two narratives together seamlessly, creating this kind of tapestry of human experience.
Absolutely. As Ella immerses herself in the world of Rumi and Shams, she starts to question her own beliefs and desires, and she embarks on his journey of self-discover that kind of mirrors Rumi's own transformation. And the parallels between their stories, I think, really become more apparent as the novel unfolds, and it highlights just the universality of these themes.
Yeah, you keep mentioning these themes, and I think one of the most prominent ones that I noticed was love. And it seems like it goes beyond just this romantic notion of love.
It does, yeah. Through the teachings of Shams, which are kind of woven throughout the narrative, we're introduced to this much broader, more spiritual perspective on love, encompassing things like divine love and friendship, compassion, even just the love we have for ourselves.
And those teachings are often referred to as the 40 Rules of Love, right?
They are, yeah.
Can you give us an example of one of these rules and maybe how it's presented in the book?
Sure. One that really stood out to me was every true love and friendship is a story of unexpected transformation. If we are the same person before and after we loved, that means we haven't loved enough. And Shafak presents this rule not through some dry philosophical discourse, but through the lived experiences of her characters.
That's interesting. So it's like love should challenge us, push us to grow and evolve. And it actually reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, this idea of transformation being a major theme in the book. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so both Ella and Rumi undergo these profound transformations that are triggered by their encounters with the other. For Ella, it's her encounter with Sweet Blasphemy, and kind of by extension with the author, that forces her to confront her own desires and the life that she's built for herself.
And then Rumi, he begins as this respected scholar, but his encounter with Shams.
It completely upends his world. Shams challenges Rumi's beliefs, his assumptions, really his whole way of being, and it leads him down this path of spiritual awakening, where he ultimately embraces his true calling as a poet and mystic.
So it's amazing how, like, a single encounter can have such a profound impact on a person's life. But how does all this relate to us as readers? Like, how do these themes resonate in the modern world?
I think that's a great question. In a world that often feels very chaotic and disconnected, I think the 40 Rules of Love reminds us that love is a really powerful force for change within ourselves and in the world around us. It encourages us to embrace our own journeys of self-discovery and to really recognize the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah, and it seems like Shafak is inviting us to kind of look beyond the surface and to delve deeper into these mysteries of love, spirituality, what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about individual journeys, maybe we should shift our focus to the characters who bring this story to life.
Yeah, I'm particularly fascinated by Shams. He's described as this enigmatic, rule-breaking dervish. Can you tell us more about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a paradox. He disrupts the status quo, he challenges conventional thinking, and yet his presence is enlightening. He opens up these new ways of seeing the world and helps Rumi connect with this deeper, more spiritual understanding of himself.
So he kind of acts as a catalyst for Rumi's transformation. But what about Rumi himself? What's he like before he meets Shams?
Before Shams, he is a respected scholar. He's deeply immersed in religious study and teaching. He lives a very comfortable and predictable life, but there's this sense that something is missing, like he's yearning for something more. And then Shams arrives and really just shakes things up, awakens something really profound within him.
It sounds like a classic tale of a mentor and a student. But with this mystical twist. What about Ella? I mean, she seems like a character that many of us can relate to.
I think he is. She is searching for fulfillment beyond her very conventional life. She feels trapped, unfulfilled in her marriage, in her role as a housewife. And it's really her encounter with sweet blasphemy that sparks her own journey of self-discovery, which again kind of mirrors Rumi's in a way.
I can already see how these characters' paths are intertwining, reflecting the broader themes of the book. But I'm curious, what did you find most intriguing about each of them?
For me, it was the way Shafak portrays their internal struggles and growth. Sean's unconventional wisdom and Rumi's gradual awakening to his true calling are both so beautifully depicted. And then Ella's courage to question her own beliefs and choices is something I think a lot of people will find inspiring.
I agree. I think each character is so well developed that they really do feel like real people, grappling with real-life challenges. And I'm curious, what do you think? Which character resonates with you the most and why? We'll dive deeper into their journeys in part 2 of our deep dive. But before we do that, let's briefly touch on the plot. And without giving any spoilers away, could you walk us through some of the key events that drive the story forward?
Sure. So in Ella's storyline, we see her relationship with Aziz, the author of Sweet Blasphemy, kind of unfold through these email correspondences. And this connection becomes a catalyst for her own personal growth and exploration. Meanwhile, back in the 13th century, the bond between Rumi and Shams causes quite a stir, drawing criticism and scrutiny from those around them.
Well, yeah, I mean, their connection was so unconventional, especially for that time period. I mean, it must have been pretty scandalous.
It was, and it ultimately has a profound impact on Rumi's life and teachings. There's also this sense of mystery surrounding Sham's eventual disappearance, which adds another layer of intrigue to that historical narrative.
I'm already hooked. It sounds like Shafak really skillfully balances those historical and contemporary elements to create a narrative that's both compelling and thought-provoking.
Exactly. The way she interweaves these storylines, creating these parallels and connections, is masterful. It keeps you engaged and wanting to know more.
And speaking of wanting to know more, let's move on to Shafak's writing style. I was immediately struck by her lyrical prose, the vivid imagery, the way she blends historical detail with contemporary relevance. What are your thoughts on her writing?
Yeah, I think her writing is beautiful. It's very rich and evocative, but also very accessible. She seamlessly incorporates Sufi teachings and poetry without it ever feeling preachy or overwhelming. It's a delicate balance, and she pulls it off beautifully.
Yeah, I think it's her ability to make these complex, often mystical concepts relatable to a modern audience. That makes her writing so compelling. She doesn't shy away from these philosophical and spiritual ideas, but she presents them in a way that invites readers to engage on a personal level.
Yeah, and she doesn't just tell us about Sufism. She really invites us to experience it through the lives of her characters, and she does it through this masterful use of symbolism and metaphor and allegory.
Yeah, I especially love the imagery of the well, which appears throughout the novel.
The well is a fascinating symbol, isn't it? It can be interpreted in so many ways: a source of life, a place of mystery, even a symbol of the human heart and its hidden depth.
Yeah, it definitely adds a layer of depth to the story, inviting readers to kind of ponder its multiple meanings. Now, I know we've only scratched the surface of the 40 Rules of Love, but before we wrap up part 1, I'm curious to hear your overall impressions. What stood out to you as the book's greatest strengths?
For me, it's the way Shafak weaves together a compelling story. With thought-provoking themes and well-developed characters, she makes Sufism accessible and relatable to a wider audience, which I think is a significant achievement.
I completely agree. It's a book that really stays with you long after you finish reading it. But I'm also curious, were there any aspects of the book that you found less effective?
Yeah, I mean, while I found the book captivating, I can see how some readers might find the pacing a bit slow at times, especially in the beginning. The mystical elegance might also be challenging for those who prefer more straightforward narratives.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the ending, some might find it a bit ambiguous, leaving them with unanswered questions.
True, but I think the ambiguity is intentional. It's meant to spark conversation and encourage reflection, and really leave the reader pondering the deeper themes long after they've finished the book.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of book you want to discuss with others, share your own interpretations.
Exactly. It invites a deeper level of engagement, which I think is one of its greatest strengths.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up part one of our deep dive into the 40 Rules of Love. Join us in part two as we delve deeper into the characters' journeys and explore the complexities of their relationships.
As we kind of delve deeper into the 40 Rules of Love, it's fascinating to see how Shafak really explores, the complexities of human relationships, both in Ella's modern-day narrative and in the historical tale of Rumi and Shams.
Yeah, and it's not all this like idealized romance either. There's conflict, misunderstanding, even heartbreak. It feels very real and relatable.
Right. She doesn't shy away from the messy realities of love and human connection. In Ella's story, for instance, we see her grappling with a marriage that's lost its spark.
Yeah, her relationship with David, it seems to have settled into this routine, this comfortable but ultimately unfulfilling existence. He's a workaholic, he's emotionally distant, and Eller's left yearning for something more.
Exactly. She craves passion, genuine connection, intellectual stimulation, which is perhaps why her relationship with Aziz, the author of Sweet Blasphemy, becomes so significant.
It does seem like a risky situation, though, developing such an intense connection with someone you've never even met in person.
Of course, I mean, it's a gamble, and Ella's aware of the potential consequences, but there's a part of her that's willing to take the risk, to open herself up to something new, even if it means facing potential heartbreak.
And then there's Rumi and Shams. Their relationship is even more unconventional, especially considering like the social norms of 13th century Kenya.
Absolutely. Their connection is intense, it's spiritual, and it's viewed for many as scandalous. Shams, in particular, is seen as this disruptive influence, a threat to Rumi's reputation and standing in the community.
But their bond seems undeniable. It challenges societal norms and ultimately transforms them both.
Right. Shams pushes Rumi to question his traditional beliefs, to think outside the box, and to embrace a more mystical understanding of God and love. And this challenges Rumi's family and those in his inner circle who are concerned by his growing attachment to Shams.
So it's interesting how Shafak portrays these contrasting relationships. This modern-day woman exploring connection through online correspondence, and this 13th century scholar whose world is upended by a wandering dervish.
Yeah, and I think it highlights the universality of these themes across time and culture. This yearning for connection, the transformative power of love, the challenges of societal expectations. These are all timeless human experiences.
And they're further illuminated through the 40 rules of love that are woven throughout the novel. I'm curious, how are these rules actually presented within the narrative?
Well, Shafak integrates them very organically. Through Sham's teachings, the characters' dialogues, even through the narrative itself, they're not presented as like a list of commandments, but rather as these insightful reflections on the nature of love and spirituality.
Could you share another example of one of these rules, and maybe how it plays out in the story?
Yeah, sure. One that resonated with me was, the path to the truth is a labor of the heart, not of the head. And this rule really emphasizes the importance of intuition, of following your heart, rather than blindly adhering to dogma or intellectual constructs.
And that's reflected in Rumi's journey, isn't it? He moves from this purely intellectual understanding of religion to a more experiential, heart-centered one.
Precisely. He learns to trust his intuition, to embrace the unknown, and to experience the divine through love and connection, rather than just through religious texts.
It's a powerful message, and one that's relevant to all of us. Regardless of our beliefs or backgrounds, it encourages us to move beyond the limitations of our minds and to tap into this deeper wisdom that resides within our hearts.
And it reminds us that the journey itself, with all its uncertainties and challenges, is just as important as the destination.
So we've talked a lot about the positive, transformative aspects of love, but the 40 Rules of Love also explores the darker side, doesn't it? The heartbreak, the jealousy, the potential for pain.
It does. It reminds us that love can be a source of both great joy and profound sorrow. It's not always easy or straightforward.
In Ella's story, for instance, we see the potential for heartbreak as she develops feelings for Aziz, a man she's never met in person.
Right, and there's also this underlying pain of her disintegrating marriage, the realization that she and David have grown apart and are really living separate lives under the same roof.
And in the historical narrative, there's a lot of jealousy surrounding Rumi and Sham's relationship. Their unconventional bond threatens the social order, and it draws criticism from those who see it as a betrayal of tradition.
Exactly. Their connection challenges societal norms, and it creates conflict even within Rooney's own family.
And ultimately, tragedy strikes. Shams disappears under mysterious circumstances, and it's hinted that he might have been murdered by those who saw him as a threat.
And that event really becomes a turning point in the novel. It forces Rumi to confront the fragility of life and the enduring power of love, even in the face of loss and grief.
So it seems like Shafak is reminding us that love is a complex, multifaceted emotion. It's not always easy or predictable, and it can bring both joy and sorrow.
Yeah, and it really highlights the courage it takes to love deeply, knowing that loss is always a possibility, but also that love in its truest form transcends even death.
Now, shifting gears a bit, I'd love to talk about the historical context of the novel. The 13th century was a time of great upheaval and change, with the Mongol invasions and clashes between different religious sects. How does Shafak bring this period to life?
Well, she does a masterful job of weaving historical details into the narrative, giving us glimpses of the political and social landscape of the time. We see the impact of the Mongol invasions, the tensions between different religious groups, and the ways in which these events shape the lives of the characters.
And she doesn't shy away from the brutality of the era either, does she?
No, she doesn't. We see scenes of violence and persecution and the often harsh realities of life in the 13th century. But she also highlights the beauty and richness of Islamic culture during this period, the flourishing of art, poetry, and spirituality.
And Sufism, of course, plays a central role in the book. For those who aren't familiar with it, could you give us a bit more background on this mystical tradition?
Sure, Sufism is often described as the heart of Islam. It emphasizes a direct, personal experience of God, focusing on inner transformation and the cultivation of love, compassion, and spiritual awareness.
And Rumi and Shams were key figures in the Sufi tradition, right?
They were. Rumi, through his poetry and teachings, is still considered one of the greatest Sufi mystics of all time. And Shams was his spiritual mentor, the one who helped him awaken to a deeper understanding of love and the divine.
So the 40 Rules of Love isn't just a love story, it's also an exploration of Sufi philosophy and practice.
It is, and Shafak does a remarkable job of making these complex ideas accessible and relatable to a modern audience.
One thing that stood out to me was the book's emphasis on tolerance and acceptance, even amidst the religious conflict of the time.
Right, and that's a core principle of Sufism. Rumi and Shams believed in a universal spirituality, one that transcended religious boundaries and embraced the common humanity in all people. They welcomed individuals from all faiths and backgrounds, promoting understanding and compassion over division and intolerance.
That message feels especially relevant today, doesn't it? In a world where religious intolerance and extremism are on the rise. It's a powerful reminder that we can choose love over hate, understanding over division.
It is. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, part of a larger whole, and that building bridges of understanding and compassion is essential for a more peaceful and harmonious world.
Beautifully said. Now, while we move on to part 3 of our deep dive, I'd like to ask you a question. As you were reading The 40 Rules of Love, what aspects of the story or characters resonated with you the most?
Well, what struck me the most was the way Shafak portrays the transformative power of love, not just in the romantic sense, but in this much broader, more spiritual context. It's the kind of love that challenges us to grow, to become better versions of ourselves, and to see the world with more compassion and understanding.
I agree. It's a love that expands our hearts and connects us to something greater than ourselves. And now I'd love to turn the question over to you as you were reading. What moments or insights stood out to you? What resonated with your own experiences and understanding of love, spirituality, or the human journey? So as we wrap up our deep dive into the 40 Rules of Love, it's fascinating to consider the enduring legacy of Rumi and Shams. You know, their story woven so beautifully into this novel continues to inspire people centuries later. Why do you think their message has resonated across time and cultures?
Well, I think it's because their message of love, compassion, and spiritual awakening speaks to this universal yearning that I think we all have within us. You know, it transcends the boundaries of time, culture, even religion.
Yeah, it seems like their teachings offer something really timeless and profound that continues to resonate with readers today. So what are some of the key takeaways from their story that we can apply to our own lives?
Well, one of the most powerful lessons, I think, is the importance of embracing change. Both Rumi and Shams underwent profound transformations, challenging their own beliefs and embracing these new ways of being. Rumi, in particular, went from a respected scholar to this ecstatic poet, expressing his spiritual insights through verse.
Right, so they remind us that growth often involves stepping outside of our comfort zones, questioning our assumptions, being open to new possibilities. And it can be a challenging process. But ultimately, I think it leads to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. Another valuable lesson, I think, is the transformative power of love. Rumi and Sham's relationship, while unconventional, was based on deep respect, admiration, and this shared passion for spiritual exploration. And I think they showed us that love in its truest form can be a catalyst for personal growth, leading us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And it's not always about romantic love, is it? It's about connecting with something larger than ourselves, whether it's through nature, art, music, or meaningful relationships. It's about finding that spark that ignites our souls and inspires us to live more authentically.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's about cultivating a love that transcends the boundaries of the ego and connects us to a deeper sense of purpose and meaning. Now, bringing it back to the novel itself, one thing that I found particularly compelling was Shafak's use of symbolism. She weaves in these layers of meaning through symbolic imagery that adds depth and richness to the story.
Oh, absolutely. Can you give us an example? I remember being struck by the recurring image of the well.
Yeah, the well is a really powerful symbol throughout the book. In the historical narrative, it represents both a source of life-giving water and a place of mystery and potential danger. It's ultimately the place where Shams disappears, adding to its symbolic weight.
Right. And I remember feeling a sense of foreboding every time the well was mentioned, almost as if it foreshadowed Sham's fate.
Exactly. And the well, I think, can also be interpreted as a metaphor for the depths of the human heart. A place where we confront our fears, our desires, our deepest truths. It's this place of transformation where we can either drown in our own darkness or emerge renewed and revitalized.
Another symbol that intrigued me was the whirling dervish. I'd love to hear your thoughts on its significance within the novel.
Yeah, the whirling dervish is a powerful symbol of spiritual ecstasy and union with the divine. It represents the shedding of the ego, the transcendence of the self through movement and music. It's a visual representation of some of the key themes, I think, that we've been discussing. Transformation, transcendence, the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image that evokes this sense of liberation, spiritual awakening. It reminds us that there's more to life than just this material world, that there's this deeper realm of experience that we can access through practices like meditation, prayer, or creative expression.
Before we wrap up our discussion, I'd like to touch on one more aspect of the book that I found particularly moving, which is this exploration of grief and loss. The loss of Shams is such a pivotal event in the novel, and it triggers such a profound transformation in Rumi.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the face of great loss, love can endure. Rumi's grief is palpable, but it's through this process of grieving that he really finds his true voice as a poet and shares his spiritual insights with the world.
Exactly. His most famous work, the Mathnali, is said to have been inspired by his love for and loss of Shams. It's a testament to the enduring power of love, how it can shape us, even in its absence.
So as we come to the end of our deep dive into the 40 Rules of Love, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I'd like to encourage them to approach this book with an open heart and an open mind. It's a book that can be read on multiple levels, offering something new each time you revisit it. It's a book that invites us to think deeply about love, spirituality, and the human condition.
Yeah, and it encourages us to embrace the complexities of life, to find beauty in the midst of pain, and to live with open hearts and open minds. It's a journey of self-discovery that can be both challenging and rewarding.
Remember, as Rumi said, what you seek is seeking you. Keep searching, keep exploring, keep loving, and may the wisdom of the 40 Rules of Love guide you on your journey.
What a beautiful way to end our discussion. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the 40 Rules of Love. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring.
And if you've read the book, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What insights did you glean from the story? Share your reflections with us on social media. Until next time, keep diving deep.